You can now find me on RoadStr, the app connecting people through cars.
Hello everybody, today I am driving a Mark IV Toyota Supra, but this one is a little bit unusual. I will confess that I both love and hate the Japanese car scene in equal measure. I love the dedication and passion that's an integral part of the Japanese car scene. I absolutely adore the fact that they expect you to want to customize and personalize a vehicle and make it your very own. As a youngster, I was absolutely mesmerized by all of these wonderful, rather exotic things. If I was at a car show and there was a Mitsubishi 3000 GT there, it made my day. I am of the Gran Turismo generation, so for me, this was a window into a whole other culture about which I knew next to nothing. I believe greatly in the power of the automobile as a real, genuine social tool, a way to bring people together. As I've gotten older, though, I found myself becoming a little bit more of a Scrooge, and I realised that a lot of the car park meets in the Japanese scene is exactly the sort of thing that will probably ruin cars for us all. The number of times I've seen somebody in a car park doing silly things with their drift missile, and yes, I know, Japanese cars, it's not a unique thing. There's plenty of people doing silly stuff in Fords and BMWs and Vauxhalls and whatever, but I think it's the Japanese car scene that really typified it for many. I have become somewhat tired of the obsession with the numbers game, and whilst I certainly appreciate a fast car, I would be a massive hypocrite if I said that I didn't. I'm not always sure that making a car faster is the same as improving it. And in recent years, the market has changed quite dramatically. One of the best things about Japanese cars used to be the fact that for a reasonably modest outlay, you could have something which would be an absolute match for any Porsche or Ferrari on both road and track. But now, cars like this are starting to command such a premium, they make the Italian equivalent look like rather good value. And now we've got ourselves in this really weird scenario where cars that 15 or 20 years ago just about anybody was buying and ragging to death, now people are sticking in museums, putting in glass boxes and being too afraid to drive because they've become so valuable. However, it is far from all bad, and there are both plenty of cars and people out there who do things, I think, the right way. This could be one example of that. It belongs to a lovely young chap called Piers. He's had this since 2015, so he got into it when it was still a reasonably affordable car. This is a Mark IV Supra, the one that pretty much everybody idolises. There have been 5 generations of the Supra now. I've driven Mark IV and the new Mark V. You can argue till the cows come home as to whether the latest one is a real Toyota, but the rest of them certainly are. This is the car that was made famous by both Gran Turismo and later Fast and Furious. Unlike the equivalent Nissan Skyline though, they were sold in America when new. But that doesn't seem to have done anything to stop prices going absolutely ballistic. Whilst they aren't commanding quite the same extremes as a GTR, they're still a pretty penny, especially if you want a good one. Like many Japanese performance cars, these also came in a number of different configurations. The most desirable to many is the twin-turbo-engined manual gearboxed car, but you could also get an automatic gearbox and you could also get a naturally aspirated car. The last time I drove a Mark IV Supra, which now feels like a lifetime ago, it was a genuine factory twin-turbo, but with an automatic gearbox. I recall rather enjoying the experience, but finding that the car was more of a GT than an outright sports car. This is the opposite, so it's a manual car from factory, but naturally aspirated. As this was from the era of the Japanese gentleman's agreement, even the full-fat twin-turbo version only made 276 horsepower from the off. These made a far more modest 220 horsepower. That puts it really roughly in line with an E46 BMW 330. It's not a number really to write home about, and I want to try and make today's review as little about numbers as I can. I'll give you a couple now, and then we're going to leave them well alone and talk instead about the driving experience, because that to me was what's really quite key, and historically has been one thing the Japanese do really very well. Though the materials aren't exactly premium, the interior of a Supra has always been a reasonably special place to spend some time. The dash layout is unlike pretty much anything else I've ever been in. It's got actually a whiff of Saab about it, because it has this kind of fighter jet sort of layout. There's a double DIN unit down here now, an old school looking Pioneer one, a mysterious red switch that I daren't touch for fear of heaven knows what's going to happen. You've got exactly the same switches you'll find in just about any 1990s Toyota, same for the indicator and wiper stalks here. But the steering wheel is beautiful in the hand, the pedals all fall naturally to you, visibility out is really rather good, and boot space is excellent too. Before they became collector's pieces, Piers put the best part of 50,000 miles on this car, and to me, that's exactly how it should be done. Even these oddball seats, which don't really look like they're anything special at all, are actually quite nice, they're fairly comfortable, and they seem to hold you in pretty well too. The only real downside for me is this dash, which is a rattly so-and-so. I promised that this car was something a little bit different. So, what's been done to it? Many people, given a car like this, would rush straight to eBay, grab themselves the biggest Snell they can find, strap it to the engine, and see how long it will last. However, Piers has gone a very different route, because this car has been given a dose of good old-fashioned, naturally aspirated tuning. The main thing he's done is fitting a set of throttle bodies. And I was very keen to try this car because I'm currently having some throttle bodies fitted to the S2000. In case you are one of the many people asking me what's been going on with the S2000, it's being worked on. The throttle bodies are being fitted. In fact, they are on the car now. I actually delivered it to M-Tech last year, just after Japfest. In fact, if you watch Adam C's video of people leaving Japfest, you will see me in the S2000 heading to take it off. I have not seen the car in the sort of 5 months since, so that's the reason you haven't been given any updates. I don't really have many to give you yet. These throttle bodies came from a company called EFI in Australia. They are apparently made to order, however, they weren't made especially well to order, so it required some tinkering to get them to fit. This has been partnered with a new manifold, a custom exhaust, and then, aside from the wheels that are not to my taste, the car is actually largely standard. So, how then does it fare? As it happens, this is painfully close to perfection. I would say this is not quite as agile as the Celica. That was always really the sportier car. Why are you gritting? Why are you gritting? No! Stop blowing holes in my ship! The fact is, this car has ample power. Oh, I forgot to mention, there are some spicy cams in this as well. Quite a bit more aggressive than the standard ones. Official power output now is around the 260 horses mark, but Piers thinks he might be able to get a little bit more from it. In fairness though, the engine now, to me, is just right to enjoy on your average British B road. It's got more than enough power. The steering is also absolutely sensational. Beautiful weighting, extremely communicative. Honestly, some of the best in any car you will ever drive. It is so enjoyable. Less enjoyable though is that noise. This is a result of the considerably larger tyres and wheels. Looking at them, you may think that Piers has gone totally overboard and put something silly on here. The fact is, by default, these were fitted with only 16-inch wheels. Trying to get sporty tyres in those sizes now is next to impossible. These are 18s, which actually look huge, and that tells you really how small the Supra actually is. One of the things that really surprised me getting back in one of these is it's not a big car. It's now running 265 wide tyres all round. Previously it was on 225 fronts and 245 rears. Despite rolling the arches, it's actually the rears which seem to catch all the time. No damage is being done, I'm told. He's not that worried about it. Piers has been very, very good. But the fronts are fine, which is really bizarre. So I expect a little tweaking is required. The car may need some help in the suspension department. At present, the suspension is actually totally standard. I think it's actually doing a better job than I probably give it credit for. It doesn't feel like the most composed ride, but I think that's actually more a result of the fact that the interior creaks and rattles a lot. We also aren't entirely sure exactly what model car this is. Yes, we know it's a Supra, but there are many different flavours of Supra, SZ, RZ, and we think this could be an SZR, I think he said, because it's got some nice features. You've got the lecky windows, electric folding mirror, air conditioning, electric seat here, that sort of stuff. It's also got a limited slip diff on the back, which is very handy, but it has leather, or vinyl, whatever it is, seats in the back, and cloth up front. That's odd. I think too odd, perhaps even for the Japanese. Next up, gearbox. What a wonderful unit, and not really a surprise. This is the 5-speed Toyota W58. I know the code because I know the gearbox fairly well. I had one in my Lotus XL, because that car shared a number of parts with the then contemporary Supra as well, including the box. Later cars, this is a 95, did get a 6-speed. The Turbo always had a 6-speed, but those apparently now are problematic because they were fitted only to 2 cars ever, the Supra and the R34 Skyline. In fairness, I've driven an R34 Skyline with said box, and I didn't think it was actually as good as the earlier 5-speeds. Because so many people were desperate to do manual swaps with auto twin-turbo cars, trying to find one of those gearboxes now is next to impossible. These, very easy to get. They can't take the big power and torque of a turbo, but here they don't have to. It's a short throw, it's direct. What a wonderful thing. Heel and toe, no trouble at all. The car makes a little bit too much noise for my liking, but it's not deafening. We've actually taken the socks off the intake trumpets. He said that's okay to do. It was his suggestion, not mine, in case anyone wants to moan. That has, of course, made it a little bit more vocal. But the thing I found really interesting is this car doesn't sound like any other 2J engined car I've seen. Typically, they've got a very smooth, quite distinct sound about them, but this has a little bit more of the rasp in it you'd associate with, say, a BMW 6. It doesn't sound like an E46 might at full chat, but it's got its own character, and I do quite like it. I have been forewarned that the speedo is reasonably optimistic. How's the turning circle? Because that's usually a weakness in cars like this. Actually, it's really good. Shall we give it some beans? And you see, it's moments like that that really do give me a proper petrol head's dilemma, because, yeah, I'd love the car to be faster, but also it doesn't need to be faster. I go to the speed limit more than quick enough. This car can carry plenty of pace through the bends. It's not really going to be any quicker in a corner than a turbo version, of course not. And so you then stop and think, actually, I'd rather it not be that quick, because that means I get to enjoy that acceleration just that little bit more. I get to have just a little bit more of that sound before I decide to back off. And honestly, I've little to no interest in the sort of wand-waving competition that some of the car scene has become. Yes, I'm now fortunate enough to have some quick and flashy stuff of my own, but in all fairness, I'm not really impressed by it inherently when someone has something like that. I'm interested more in how a car feels, how it drives. This is superb. It is a shame to me that it's in pretty much the same colour as just about every other Supra you see that's not a Fast and Furious replica. Just got a little bit of a sense there that the rear wasn't as planted as I expected. Just moved ever so slightly, but not daunting, not scary. Power is really quite linear. Pulls now to 7,200 RPM. The naturally aspirated engines, unsurprisingly, have a higher compression ratio than the turbo units. If anything, I'd say it's probably geared just a little bit short. So let's get it up to about what is probably 60. Yeah, it's already doing about 3,000 RPM at 60 odd mile an hour, so it is geared on the short side. That being said though, despite the leery exhaust, it's actually reasonably refined when you're not on it. Clutch engagement, really easy. Throttle, wonderful, very linear. The weakness is the brakes. They're just 2 pot items, even at the front. This apparently is a function of it being a Japanese spec naturally aspirated car. Big brake kits are available for it, and at some point Piers is probably going to put one of those on. That, I would say, is a very, very worthwhile upgrade, as would be a little bit of tinkering in the suspension department. Boy, that does tempt your progress when the car keeps tapping the arches. I once said that the thing about a Supra is everyone goes into it expecting it to be a hardcore sports car, but I felt like it was more of a GT. I've often said that actually it's the RX-7 which is probably the car people should buy. That's a much more inherently sporty thing. This is making me feel like I got things a little bit wrong. With the auto box in and the twin-turbo engine, it certainly does have very much a GT character. Set up like this though, it's definitely a proper sports car. Just as well, because the rear seats aren't really that much good to anybody. This is in theory a bigger car than the Celica, but from in here doesn't feel that different. These days I suppose the Celica is rather a problem for the Supra as well, because you can still pick those up for quite a bit less money, even a GT4. However, it is missing that iconic 6-cylinder soundtrack, and the truth is the Supra is always going to be a bit more desirable than the Celica. I have had a very long day today, and I have driven a very wide range of cars. I started with a Yaris T-Sport, then I drove a Rolls-Royce, and I've also put a few miles on a Ferrari as well. And yet, of all the cars I've driven today, this still stands out. This does what Japanese cars should do. It's putting a big smile on my face, puts a big smile on the owner's face, and I can understand completely why he's not so bothered that the heater doesn't really want to work properly, why the antenna at the back is missing, that there's a dent in the side of it, because you know what? It doesn't always matter. Having the shiniest, biggest power, most impressive build sometimes is completely and totally irrelevant. And now is one of those times, because what I'm driving right here, right now, is simply put a massively enjoyable car. And while I can totally understand a lot of people not being into the Japanese car scene for reasons including some that I may have already mentioned, there is an awful lot to love about it. And cars like this are it for me. So a huge thank you to Piers for bringing his car out today. Please like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you for the next one.